Zara had killed 17 people in her professional career and had never once failed a contract. She was 26 years old, which was considered remarkably young for a guild assassin of her rank. She had earned her rank the way everyone earned things in the guild, through competence, patience, and the particular willingness to do difficult things without flinching. She was not the fastest assassin in the guild, nor the strongest. She was the most precise. She studied her targets the way a scholar studied a text thoroughly, without assumptions, looking for the thing that everyone else had missed. She had never missed. Until now, a small voice in the back of her mind suggested, as she stood in the guild master's office and looked at the contract on the desk between them. She picked it up, she read it carefully, she set it back down. Zara, you want me to kill the Vampire Lord of Ashenmoor. Guild Master, the contract specifies elimination, yes. Zara Dorian Vale, 300 years old, rules the entire Northern Territory, has survived 14 previous assassination attempts by guild members. Guild Master, 15, if you count the independent contractor last spring. Zara, why me? The guild master folded his hands on the desk. He was a careful man who chose his words the way Zara chose her weapons, for precision and effect. Guild Master, because you study your targets, because you find the thing everyone else misses, and because the client is offering 3 times the standard rate, which suggests they have run out of patience and are now willing to pay for certainty. Zara, nobody has gotten close enough to attempt a clean kill. Guild Master, nobody has gotten close enough to attempt anything. He knows when they're coming, every time. Zara, so the challenge is access. Guild Master, the challenge is everything, but yes, access is where it starts. Zara looked at the contract for a moment longer. 3 times the standard rate was enough to buy her out of the guild entirely, the thing she had been working toward for 6 years. 6 more years of standard contracts, or one of this. She picked up the contract. Zara, I'll need full access to everything the guild has on him. Every attempt, every report, every piece of intelligence going back to the beginning. Guild Master, already prepared. Zara, and I'll do it my way. No timeline, no check-ins, no interference. Guild Master, the client won't like that. Zara, the client has tried 15 times with their way. Tell them to try mine. She walked out of the office with the contract in her hand, and the particular calm of someone who has just made a decision they intend to see through completely. She did not tell herself it would be easy. She told herself it would be interesting. She had always found that distinction useful. She spent 3 weeks reading everything the guild had on Dorian Vale before she went anywhere near Ashenmoor. The files were extensive. 15 failed attempts generated a great deal of documentation. She read every report, every debrief, every note from every assassin who had come before her. She mapped the attempts chronologically and looked for patterns. The pattern was immediately obvious and immediately strange. He knew they were coming. Every single time, without exception, he had known. The advance warnings could not be explained by informants. The guild's security was too tight. They could not be explained by supernatural perception alone. Several of the attempts had been designed specifically to account for that. He had known in ways that defied every conventional explanation. But here was the thing that nobody's report had addressed, because nobody had apparently thought it was worth addressing. He had known, and he had not left. 15 times, Dorian Vale had known an assassin was coming for him, and 15 times he had stayed exactly where he was and waited. Zara read that detail and sat with it for a long time. A man who wanted to survive would have left. A man who wanted to send a message would have had the assassin killed before they arrived. Dorian Vale had done neither. He had waited, and he had let the attempts happen, and he had survived them, but the surviving, in every report, read less like defense and more like something else she didn't have a word for yet. She moved on to his history, 300 years of it, which was a great deal of history to get through. She read it the way she read everything thoroughly, looking for the thing everyone else had missed. What she found was not what she expected. Dorian Vale was not, by any account she could find, a cruel ruler. His territory was orderly and prosperous. His people, human and vampire alike, were neither oppressed nor particularly afraid. He had maintained peace in the Northern Territory for 2 centuries without the kind of violence that most vampire lords used as their primary governance tool. The contract did not say why someone wanted him dead. Contracts never did, but Zara had learned to wonder about the why, because the White told you things about the target that nothing else could. She packed her bag on the 22nd day and headed north. She went not as an assassin, she went as a scholar of Northern history with forged credentials and a genuine letter of recommendation from a real academic institution that owed the guild a favor. She went openly through the front gates of Ashenmoor in broad daylight. If he knew everyone was coming, the only logical approach was to be the one person who was not trying to hide. Ashenmoor was not what she had expected. She had expected darkness, the theatrical darkness of a vampire lord's territory, all perpetual night and Gothic architecture, and the particular atmosphere of somewhere that wanted you to know it was dangerous. She had visited such places before on previous contracts and had found them tiresomely predictable. Ashenmoor was beautiful. That was the word she kept coming back to as she rode through the gates and into the city beyond. Old stone buildings with flowering vines climbing their walls, markets busy with people who did not look afraid, wide streets lit by lanterns that burned a warm amber color in the early evening, children running, dogs sleeping in doorways. It looked like somewhere people wanted to live. The castle at the center of Ashenmoor was large and old, and considerably less dramatic than its reputation suggested. She was shown to a guest room by a human staff member who was entirely cheerful and entirely normal, and who told her that the Lord would receive her in the study at 7. She used the intervening hours to map the castle. Exits, guard rotations, structural weak points, the locations of every window and every staircase. She did this with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 6 years, cataloging everything while appearing to do nothing more than settle into her room. At 7, she went to the study. He was already there. Ivory skin almost luminous in the lamplight, with the particular quality of something that had been pale for 3 centuries rather than having been born pale. Silver hair, worn loose to his jaw, the color of old metal rather than white, and his eyes, when he turned from the window where he had been standing, red, but not the theatrical red of a monster. Deep red, the color of garnets, the color of old wine, the color of something that had been burning slowly for a very long time. He looked at her. She looked back. He knew she could see it immediately, not from anything obvious, not from any change in his expression or his posture. She could see it the way she could see most things about people, from the specific quality of his attention. He was not looking at a scholar of Northern history. He was looking at her. Dorian, you came through the front gate. Zara, I find it more efficient. A pause. He studied her with those garnet eyes, and she studied him back with the same quality of attention. Dorian's, none of the others did. Zara, I read their reports. Their methods were not working. He was very still. She was very still. The study was warm and lamplit and full of books and the particular atmosphere of somewhere that had been lived in thoughtfully for a very long time. Dorian, you're not going to pretend. Zara, you already know. Pretending would waste both our time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened to his expression that she had not predicted, something that was not threat, not anger, not the response of a man whose life was in danger, something that looked considerably more like interest. Dorian, would you like some wine? She stared at him. Zara, you're offering the assassin wine. Dorian, you've had a long journey, and I find I would like to talk to you. She sat down. He poured the wine. It was very good wine. Neither of them mentioned the contract again that evening. They talked about Northern history. Instead, she knew it genuinely, because she had spent 3 weeks reading about it, and he knew it because he had lived it. It was the most interesting conversation she had had in years. She left the study at midnight and went back to her room and lay in the dark, thinking about the way he had said, I find I would like to talk to you, with the specific precision of someone who had chosen each word carefully. She was still thinking about it when she fell asleep. She made her first attempt on the 3rd night. She had spent 2 days mapping the castle properly, exits, guard patterns, his personal schedule, the specific hours when he was most likely to be alone. She was thorough. She was always thorough. She found him in the library at 2 in the morning, which she had correctly predicted. He was reading, which she had also correctly predicted. He was alone, which was the point. She came through the window. She had a blade in her hand before her feet touched the floor. She crossed the library in 6 steps. He turned the page of his book. She stopped. He was reading. He had not looked up. The blade was in her hand, and she was 6 feet from him, and he was reading. with the complete ease of someone who was not concerned about the assassin who had just come through his library window. Dorian, the third chapter is the most interesting. If you're planning to wait, you might as well sit down. She did not sit down. She held her position and assessed. He was not afraid, that was the first thing. She had seen many people in the moment before they understood their situation, and fear was the universal response. It moved through them in a specific way she had learned to read. There was no fear in him. There was also no aggression, no preparation, no sense of a trap about to spring. There was just a man reading a book. Zara, you knew I was coming. Dorian, I know when anyone is coming. It's a very old habit. Zara, and you didn't leave. Dorian, I never leave. Zara, why? He turned another page. He finally looked up at her, those garnet eyes, direct and unhurried. Dorian, because I'm curious about whether any of you will eventually ask that question before you try to kill me rather than after. She looked at him, he looked at her. The library was very quiet. Zara, you're going to let me try. Dorian, I'm going to let you try. Zara, and you'll survive. Dorian, I have so far. She tried, she was very good, and she had studied him carefully, and she used every technique she had. None of them worked. He was 300 years old, and he moved in ways that her training had not fully prepared her for, not violently, not aggressively, but with the specific economy of something that had learned every possible attack and had found the precise minimum response required to neutralize each one. He never once struck back. He simply moved, redirected, created space, let her exhaust the attempt against nothing. She stood in the library 15 minutes later, breathing harder than she wanted to, her blade still in her hand and nothing to show for it. He was standing across the room with his hands in his pockets and his silver hair slightly displaced, and his garnet eyes watching her with that expression she still could not name. Dorian, you're better than the others. Zara, that's not particularly comforting. Dorian, it wasn't meant to be comforting, it was an observation. She put the blade away, she looked at him. Zara, why do you let them try, all 15 of them? Why not just end it before it starts? He was quiet for a moment. Dorian, because ending it before it starts would require me to act first, and I find I am not willing to do that. Zara, that's not a complete answer. Dorian, no, it isn't. He picked up his book. Dorian, come back tomorrow. We'll have dinner, and then you can try again if you like. She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall and thought about a man who had survived 15 assassination attempts by simply not fighting back. She could not figure him out. She had never had that problem before. She found, to her significant irritation, that she wanted to come back to dinner. A pattern developed. She would attempt to kill him. He would survive it without harming her. They would have dinner. It was, she was aware, the strangest professional situation she had ever been in. She had also never been so consistently well-fed on a contract. The dinners were where she learned him, not from what he said. He was precise with language and careful about what he disclosed, but from how he was. 300 years of existing had given him a quality she could only describe as settled. He was not performing anything. He was simply himself, in a way that most people were not, because most people spent considerable energy managing how they appeared to others. He sat across from her at dinner and talked about books and history and the specific governance challenges of running a territory that contained both humans and vampires, and he was interested in her responses in the genuine way that people were interested when they were actually listening rather than waiting to speak. She caught herself being honest with him, which was not something she had planned. On the fifth dinner, after the third attempt, he said, "Dorian, you're running out of conventional approaches." Zara, I'm aware. Dorian, the next ones will be more creative. Zara, is that a challenge? Dorian, it's an observation. You're the most methodical assassin who has come here. You will have exhausted the standard techniques by the 7th or 8th attempt, and then you'll have to improvise. I'm curious what that looks like. She looked at him across the dinner table, ivory skin in candlelight, silver hair, garnet eyes watching her with that impossible calm. Zara, you're curious about the attempts. Dorian, I'm curious about you. The attempts are attached. She was quiet for a moment. Zara, why are you doing this? Really, any of it. The dinners, the conversations, letting me try. You could have had me removed from the territory on the first day." He set down his wine glass. He looked at her with a directness that she had come to recognize as his version of full disclosure. "Dorian, because in 300 years, you are the first person who came through the front gate. You are the first person who did not pretend. You are the first person who asked why before they tried instead of after." "Zara, I asked after." "Dorian, you asked the same night. That's considerably faster than anyone else." She absorbed that. "Zara, that's why you let them try. You're waiting for someone to ask the right question first." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Dorian, I'm waiting for someone who wants to understand more than they want to complete the contract." The candles burned between them. She looked at him. He looked back. "Zara, and if I do complete the contract." "Dorian, then I will have been wrong about you, which would be disappointing but not surprising. I am often wrong about people." She went back to her room and did not sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about being the first person to come through the front gate and what that meant and why it mattered to him and why she was being honest with herself now, which was uncomfortable. It mattered to her that it mattered to him. She found the answer on the 31st day in the castle's archive. He had given her access to the archive genuinely, openly, with no apparent concern about what she might find there because she had mentioned an interest in Northern territorial history and he had taken her at her word, or appeared to. She was no longer entirely certain what he took at face value and what he saw straight through. She had been using the archive for research on her 6th attempt, looking for something in the historical records that might give her an approach she hadn't tried yet. What she found instead was a trade document from 18 years ago between a consortium of Southern merchants and the previous administration of the Northern Territory. She read it 3 times to make sure she was understanding it correctly. The document outlined an agreement the previous Lord of Ashenmoor, Dorian Vale's predecessor, had agreed to allow the Southern merchants access to the Northern Territory's mineral deposits in exchange for military support. The agreement had included a clause that transferred certain sovereign rights of the Northern Territory to the merchant consortium upon the death of Dorian Vale. She sat back in her chair. The contract on Dorian Vale's life was not about power or revenge or any of the reasons vampire lords were usually targeted. It was about money. Specifically, it was about the fact that the Southern Merchant Consortium, almost certainly the client who had taken out the contract, stood to gain control of the most mineral-rich territory in the north the moment Dorian Vale was dead. He was not the villain of this story. He was the obstacle in someone else's profitable plan. She found him in the study that evening. He was at his desk, writing. He wrote letters by hand, she had noticed, in the specific way of someone who had learned to write before printing presses existed and had never fully trusted the alternative. She put the trade document on the desk in front of him. He looked at it, he looked at her. "Zara, you knew about this." "Dorian, I've known about it for 16 years. "Zara, and you never." Dorian destroyed it, had the consortium dealt with, used it as leverage. He set down his pen. "Dorian, I considered all of those options. I rejected them because all of them involved me acting first against people who had not yet directly harmed anyone in my territory. The document is not an act. The contract is not an act. The assassins." He glanced at her. "Dorian, are not an act until they attempt something. I don't move against intentions. I only move against actions. It's a principle I've maintained for 300 years, and I find it has served me better than the alternative." Zara, the alternative being. Dorian, becoming the thing people write contracts about for legitimate reasons. She sat down across from him. She looked at the document. She thought about 17 contracts, and the reasons behind none of them she had ever questioned, and the specific discomfort of sitting across from a man who was the target of her current one, and finding that the discomfort was entirely on her side. Zara, the client, is the Valdenmere Merchant Consortium. Dorian, yes. Zara, they hired the guild. They paid 3 times the standard rate. Dorian, they've been escalating. The rate went up after the 12th attempt. Zara, and you just wait, every time. Dorian, every time. She looked at him, ivory skin in the lamplight, silver hair, garnet eyes watching her with the patience of someone who had been doing this for 3 centuries and had decided it was the right approach and was not going to be moved from it. Zara, that's either the most principled thing I've ever heard or the most exhausting. Dorian, it's both. They're not mutually exclusive. She almost laughed. She stopped herself. The seventh attempt was different from the others. She knew it was different before she made it. She had been in Ashenmoor for 40 days, and she knew him now not completely. He was 300 years old, and she was 26, and there were depths there she had not reached but enough. Enough to know the way he moved through the castle at night, the specific hour when he was most absorbed in his reading, the rooms he preferred and the ones he avoided. She also knew that she was running out of legitimate attempts. She had exhausted everything in her professional toolkit and was now in territory that required genuine creativity. The seventh attempt was her most ambitious, yet a combination of timing, misdirection, and a specific vulnerability she had identified in his pattern after 6 weeks of careful observation. It almost worked. Almost was the operative word. She got closer than any of the previous 16 assassins, closer than she had gotten on any of her own previous 6 attempts. Close enough that for 1 second, she genuinely could not see how he was going to survive it. He survived it, she was not entirely sure how. She was also in the aftermath, pressed against the wall of the east corridor, with his hand on the wall beside her head, and his garnet eyes very close, and the specific situation of someone who has just tried very hard to kill a person, and has ended up considerably closer to them than planned. Neither of them moved. Dorian, that was the best one. Zara, I know. Dorian's, you found the gap in the pattern. Zara, I found a gap, there are others. He looked at her, she looked at him. His silver hair was slightly displaced, and his garnet eyes were very present, and the corridor was very quiet, and she was aware of approximately 17 things simultaneously, most of which were inconvenient. Dorian, Zara. Her name and his voice. He had used it before at dinner, in conversation, but this was different. This was the way you said a name when the name mattered. Dorian, why are you still trying? She held his gaze. She had been honest with him from the beginning, and she was not going to stop now. Zara, because I took the contract, and I finish what I start. Dorian, that's the professional reason. Zara, yes. Dorian, is there another reason? She was quiet for a moment. Zara, because every time I try I learn something about you, and I find I haven't learned enough yet. He was very still. The corridor was very still. She could feel the specific quality of his attention, full and unhurried, and directed entirely at her. Dorian, and when you have. Zara, I don't know yet. I'll tell you when I get there. He stepped back. He straightened his coat. He looked at her with those garnet eyes and the expression she had spent 40 days trying to name. Dorian, dinner is at 8. He walked away down the corridor. She stood against the wall for a moment longer than necessary. The expression on his face, she had finally found the word for it. It was hope. She went to find him after dinner that night. Not with a blade, not with a plan, just herself, which was in some ways more frightening than either. He was in the library. He was always in the library at this hour. She knew his patterns as well as she knew her own now, and he looked up when she came in without surprise, which she had also come to expect. Zara, I need to ask you something. Dorian, you've been asking me things for 40 days. Zara, this one is different. He set down his book. He gave her his full attention, which was the thing about him she had found most unexpectedly significant, the complete quality of it, the sense of someone for whom half attention was not an available setting. Zara, why does it matter to you, whether any of us ask the right question, whether any of us want to understand rather than just complete the contract? Why does it matter? He was quiet for a long time. Dorian, I have been the Vampire Lord of Ashenmoor for 300 years. In that time I have governed, negotiated, managed, maintained. I have done all of it carefully, and I have done most of it alone because the nature of what I am means that the people around me change and leave and I remain. He looked at the books around him, 3 centuries of accumulated reading, 3 centuries of evenings in this room. Dorian, the contract started 60 years ago, when the merchant consortium first understood what they stood to gain. The first assassins came, and I survived them, and I began to understand something about the attempts that I had not expected. Zara, what? Dorian, that I was not afraid of them. I should have been any reasonable creature faced with repeated attempts on their life would develop some version of fear. I didn't. What I felt instead was. He stopped, he chose his words. Dorian, lonely is not the right word. It's too small. I felt the specific weight of 300 years of being something that people either wanted to destroy or wanted to use, and I thought, if one of them ever comes here and simply wants to understand, if one of them ever asks why before they try, then perhaps the 300 years have been worth something. The library was very quiet. Zara, you've been waiting. Dorian, I've been waiting. Zara, for someone to see you. Dorian, for someone to look. She crossed the library. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him, ivory skin, silver hair, garnet eyes that were carrying 300 years of patience and something else, something that had been growing since the front gate, since the first dinner, since she had laughed in this room and he had looked at her like that. Zara, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that it is not something I say easily. Dorian, all right. Zara, I don't want to complete the contract. A pause. Zara, I have never not completed a contract. In 6 years, not once. And I am standing here telling you that I don't want to complete this one, which means something significant about what 40 days in this castle has done to my professional standards. He looked at her, she looked back. Dorian, what has it done? Zara, it has made me significantly more interested in you alive than dead, which is, professionally speaking, a disaster. Something moved across his face, that thing she had named, hope, getting closer to the surface. Dorian, and personally speaking. She held his gaze. Zara, personally speaking, it is the most inconvenient thing that has happened to me in 6 years, and I find I don't mind it at all. He stood, he was taller than her, she had always been aware of this in the physical context of the attempts, but this was different. This was him standing up because she was close, and he wanted to be closer. He raised one hand and tucked a strand of her black hair back from her face carefully, the way you touch something you have been waiting a long time to touch. Dorian, the contract. Zara, I'll return it, forfeit the fee. I've done it before once, on a contract that turned out to be built on false information. The guild won't like it, but they'll accept it. Dorian, and the consortium. Zara, will try again, with someone else. Dorian, yes. Zara, then we deal with that when it comes. Together, if you'll have it that way. I know things about how the guild operates that might be useful. He looked at her for a long moment. Dorian, you came here to kill me. Zara, I came here through the front gate. I think that was always going to lead somewhere different. He looked at her with those garnet eyes, and the hope fully on the surface now, no longer something she had to work to see. He kissed her, she kissed him back. The library was warm around them and the lamplight was steady, and 300 years of waiting was finally over. She sent the contract back to the guild with a formal forfeiture notice and a brief professional explanation that cited irreconcilable intelligence failures on the part of the client. The guild master sent back a response that was 3 sentences long. The first sentence acknowledged the forfeiture. The second sentence noted that this was the first forfeiture of her career. The third sentence said simply, I assume you have your reasons. She did. She spent the following weeks doing what she had always done on contracts, gathering information, identifying patterns, building a complete picture of the situation. The difference was that she was now doing it in service of the target rather than against him, which required some adjustment in methodology, but no adjustment in approach. Dorian watched her work with the specific attention she had come to recognize as his form of affection total, unhurried, genuinely interested in every piece of it. Dorian, you're building a case. Zara, I'm building a file. There's a difference. A case goes to court. A file goes to people who can use it. Dorian, and who can use it? Zara, the Northern Territorial Council has legal authority over trade agreements made in their jurisdiction. The document I found in your archive is evidence of an agreement that violated 3 separate territorial laws. If the council sees it, the consortium loses their claim entirely. Legally, without anyone having to do anything the consortium can retaliate against. He looked at her. Dorian, you're solving the problem the way I would solve it. Zara, I'm solving it the way it should be solved. No one acts first. We use what's already there. He was quiet for a moment. Dorian, you've been paying attention. Zara, I pay attention to everything. It's a professional habit. You should know you've watched me do it for 40 days. He smiled. She had seen him smile exactly 3 times before this moment, and she had been cataloging them the way she cataloged everything, with full attention and the awareness that they were significant. This one was different from the previous 3. This one was the smile of someone who has stopped being careful about showing something. She found she wanted to see it considerably more often. The file went to the Northern Territorial Council 3 weeks later. The council reviewed the trade document and the 3 territorial law violations it contained and began formal proceedings against the merchant consortium that would take months to resolve, but would, when they did, resolve entirely in Dorian's favor. The consortium sent one more assassin. She was there when he arrived, not through the front gate, this one, through a back entrance, and she met him in the corridor before he reached the main hall and had a very brief professional conversation with him that resulted in his immediate and voluntary departure from the territory. Dorian found her in the corridor afterward. Dorian, you handled that. Zara, he was a junior guild member, not difficult. Dorian, you didn't have to. Zara, you don't act first. I don't have that limitation. He looked at her for a moment with those garnet eyes. Dorian, we complement each other. Zara, we do. I find that useful. Dorian, only useful. She looked at him, 300 years old, ivory skin, silver hair, garnet eyes that had been waiting for someone to come through the front gate, and she had. Zara, also several other things that I am still cataloging. He laughed. She had never heard him laugh before, not really, not fully. It was a good sound. She intended to hear it again. She did not return to the guild. She had been working toward buying her way out for 6 years, and she had the savings to do it. The forfeited contract fee was painful but manageable, and she submitted the paperwork on a morning in late autumn and received the guild master's acceptance by return post with a note that said simply, "I thought you might." She stayed in Ashenmoor. This was not a decision she made dramatically or with announcement. It was a decision that made itself gradually, the way the important ones usually did, out of the accumulation of mornings in the castle library and evenings at the dinner table, and the specific quality of a place where she had found, entirely unexpectedly, that she wanted to be. She was useful there. She had 6 years of guild knowledge and the specific skills of someone who had spent her career studying how people protected things and how they failed to. And Dorian's territory had both an archive that needed proper organization and a security apparatus that needed someone who understood how the people threatening it actually operated. She reorganized the archive first. It took 4 months. He watched her do it with the attention he gave everything, and somewhere in the 2nd month he started helping, and somewhere in the 3rd month the archive reorganization had somehow also become the most sustained conversation she had ever had in her life about history and governance, and the specific challenges of managing a territory for 3 centuries, and what she had observed in 6 years of contracts that had taught her things about human nature she had not expected to learn. He listened to all of it. He always listened to all of it. On the evening she finished the archive, she found a book on the desk in her room, not the library, her room, with a note inside the front cover in his handwriting. The note said, "Volume 1 of your record." The book was blank. She understood what he meant. She was now part of what was being kept. She took the book to the library and sat down across from him and opened it to the first page. Zara, what should I write first? Dorian, whatever seems most important. She thought about it, then she wrote in her precise professional hand. She came through the front gate. He read it. He looked at her. Dorian, that's where it started. Zara, that's where everything started. I thought it was worth recording. He reached across the table and took her hand, the hand that had held a blade against him 7 times, the hand that had built the file that ended the contract, the hand that had been reaching for things her whole life with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She turned her hand over and held his. Outside the library windows, Ashenmoor moved through its evening lanterns coming on in amber sequences, people finishing their days, the city going about the ordinary business of being a place where people wanted to live. Inside, 2 people sat in a warm library with a blank book and 300 years of history and everything still ahead of them. She had been hired to kill him. She had come through the front gate instead. It had made, as she had suspected from the beginning, all the difference.